relations between the United States and China have entered a new phase. In December 2025, a U.S. Navy destroyer intercepted the Pacific Voyager, an oil tanker transporting Venezuelan crude to China in the South Atlantic. The vessel, registered in Panama, was stopped under U.S. sanctions directed at Venezuela's state oil company, PDVSA. This is the first instance of the U.S. applying these sanctions to a ship destined for China. The Chinese government responded by describing the action as a violation of international law. President Xi Jinping called for the vessel's release, presenting the event as a matter of national sovereignty. Chinese state media characterized the incident as a challenge to China's participation in global trade. The United States maintains that the seizure is part of its efforts to enforce sanctions and limit revenue to the Maduro government. The development has influenced global energy markets and diplomatic discussions. It also brings attention to the scope of national sanctions in international waters. The possibility of direct US-China engagement at sea is now under consideration. Other countries are observing the situation, mindful of potential impacts on their own trade. Observers are debating whether this represents a singular event or a shift in US foreign policy. The effects on global trade and economic stability are being closely analyzed. The international community is monitoring developments as they unfold. China's official response centers on international law and sovereignty. Beijing accuses the US of overreaching, applying its laws outside its borders to disrupt legitimate trade. Chinese officials argue that US sanctions are unilateral, not backed by the UN, and have no authority over non-US entities. Formal protests have been lodged at the UN and directly with Washington. China warns that such actions threaten the global maritime order and set a dangerous precedent. The crew's detention adds a humanitarian angle, with Beijing demanding their immediate release. China frames the US move as a violation of seafarers' rights and maritime tradition. At the core is China's principle of non-interference. Trade with Venezuela is a normal state-to-state activity, not an endorsement of its politics. By seizing the tanker, China says the US is imposing its will on others, violating the UN Charter. The standoff is now about more than oil. It's about the rules that govern the world's oceans. The stakes for global order have never been clearer. The USS Farragut, a US Navy destroyer, intercepted the Pacific Voyager 300 nautical miles off Brazil, deep in international waters. After the tanker's captain refused a boarding request, US forces boarded by helicopter and boat, taking control without violence. The Pacific Voyager, a massive crude carrier registered in Panama but owned by a Hong Kong-based company, was carrying over 2 million barrels of sanctioned Venezuelan oil. US officials allege the ship's ownership structure was designed to evade sanctions. The Department of Justice has filed to seize both the vessel and its cargo, treating the oil as an asset linked to money laundering and sanctions violations. The crew, mostly Chinese nationals, remains detained aboard as the ship is escorted to a US port. The Pentagon released footage of the operation showing armed personnel securing the tanker. The US aims to project resolve while minimizing the appearance of aggression. This operation signals a new willingness to enforce sanctions on the high seas. The legal and diplomatic fallout is just beginning. The world is watching how far the US will go. The Pacific Voyager's fate now lies in US courts. The message: no vessel is beyond reach. The seizure has sparked fierce debate among international law experts. Critics say the US violated the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, which protects freedom of navigation. Many argue that enforcing domestic sanctions in international waters could be seen as piracy. The US counters that it's acting against transnational crime, money laundering and sanctions evasion under universal jurisdiction. Venezuela's government denounced the act as piracy and economic terrorism, calling for UN intervention. Caracas vows to pursue legal and diplomatic action to reclaim its property. Other nations are uneasy, fearing this sets a precedent for future maritime seizures. Some support US aims against Maduro, but most worry about the erosion of maritime security. The Organization of American States is split, reflecting deep regional divisions. The world faces a new test of the rules that govern the seas. The incident exposes China's greatest weakness: its dependence on imported oil. Most of China's crude travels through vulnerable sea lanes, especially the Strait of Malacca. The US seizure, even far from Asia, is a stark warning. America can disrupt China's energy supply anywhere. This turns a long-feared vulnerability into a present reality for Beijing. China's loans for oil deals with Venezuela are now at risk, threatening both energy security and financial interests. The move creates uncertainty for Chinese shipping and raises insurance costs. Companies may avoid trading with sanctioned countries, chilling China's global commerce. The ripple effects could slow China's economic expansion. The message is clear: China's supply lines are now a strategic battleground. The Pacific Voyager seizure marks a new phase in US sanctions enforcement, moving from financial pressure to direct interdiction. The US is signaling it will physically block sanctioned goods, even at the risk of clashing with China. This is part of a broader US effort to counter China's growing influence in Latin America. The action reasserts the Monroe Doctrine, warning Beijing and others that the US will defend its regional interests. US law now allows targeting a wide range of actors involved in sanctioned trade. Critics warn this could push China, Russia, and Iran into closer alliance, undermining US influence. Allies are uneasy with such unilateral moves, fearing global instability. The long-term impact depends on whether this pressure changes behavior or hardens opposition. The US is betting that economic pain will force change, but the risk of backlash is real. The world is watching to see if this gamble pays off. China is accelerating efforts to reduce its energy vulnerabilities. The Belt and Road Initiative aims to build new land and sea routes, bypassing choke points like Malacca. Overland pipelines to Central Asia and Russia are expanding, making China less reliant on maritime imports. Energy trade with Russia, including Arctic projects, is growing. Routes the US Navy can't easily threaten. China is investing heavily in renewables and nuclear power to boost domestic energy production. Every new megawatt at home means less dependence on risky sea lanes. China is also rapidly expanding its navy, aiming to protect its shipping and deter future seizures. The plan isn't yet a match for the US Navy, but its growing strength raises the stakes. Beijing's message future interdictions will be met with greater resistance. The Pacific Voyager incident will only accelerate China's quest for energy security. The Pacific Voyager seizure is a turning point in US-China relations. The US has shown it's willing to use naval power to enforce its laws globally, directly challenging China's access to resources. This sets a dangerous precedent, raising the risk for all international trade. The principle of freedom of navigation is now under threat. The risk of miscalculation and escalation between major powers is rising. China will likely accelerate its diversification and military modernization in response. Retaliation could come in many forms: cyber, economic, or military. The world faces a more unpredictable era, with the rules of global trade in flux. De-escalation will require careful diplomacy, but deep mistrust makes that difficult. The stability of the global system has rarely felt more fragile.